Join me now as I process my very confused and upset emotions. Come with me to a land of pure imagination as I sort through my mixed feelings about a potentially great and also potentially catastrophic media property. Hi, my name's Bob of the Old Ways. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not new here, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about something I only learned about recently. Apparently this has been going on for a couple of years now, but because I don't really follow right-wing media that closely, I had no idea it was happening. The DailyWire apparently is imploding. And one of the consequences of that implosion, which I talked about on a podcast, a live stream with Dane of Actual Fandom and some other people back on Sunday. You can go check that out on my channel. One of the consequences of this imminent collapse is that I learned that the Daily Wire has apparently filmed and is currently in post-production on a streaming TV, a prestige TV streaming format adaptation of the Pendragon Cycle, which is one of my favorite fantasy book series of all time. And I don't really know how I should feel about it. So we're gonna look through it. We're gonna watch some clips. We're gonna talk about lore and all that other stuff, and I'll share my concerns with all of you. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Pendragon Cycle is a series of historical fantasy novels that was written in the 1980s to the 1990s, which is when I read it. And unlike a lot of book series, I didn't read it again, but it always stuck with me. I never stopped thinking about it. And it is an adaptation of the Arthurian myth cycle. But unlike most Arthurian stories up to that time, it was not set in a chivalric, high medieval, vaguely French, vaguely Crusades era time period. We know with gleaming plate mail armor and jousting and all of that. No, this version of the story was set closer in time to when it might have actually happened. We don't have any concrete proof that there was a historical figure on whom the figure of King Arthur was based, but most scholars agree that if such a person did exist, it was around this time. And the time period is a very transformational one in the history of the British Isles. It was the 5th and the 4th century, or the 4th and the 5th century, excuse me. The Roman Empire was slowly receding from the British Isles. The power vacuum that left opened up opportunities for petty warlords and tribal leaders to try and claim their piece of the pie. And the culture overall was transitioning from paganism to Christianity, although it would be a version of Christianity that's probably unrecognizable to anyone living in the modern world. So there was a lot going on. And the author of these books, Stephen R. Lawhead, did a lot of really intricate research and placed the story in its possible historic setting. He incorporated real historical figures and real historical events. He did a lot of detailed research about the pace of daily life, what kinds of fibers different tribes used for their clothing, their hairstyles, their face paints, all that stuff, the religious rituals they engaged in, whether they were pagan or Christian, because there were variations within those groups as well as between them, all of that stuff. And into this historical milieu, he slipped the Arthurian cycle, the story of the rise of King Arthur and everything that came before him, before he was born, in order to set the stage for Arthur's rise to power. And one of the cool things that Stephen R. Lawhead did, I thought, at least at the time, was he integrated the myth of Atlantis with the myth of King Arthur in a really cool and unique way. Basically, what he did was postulated that all of the figures we read about in Arthurian myth who are described in later stories as like fairies or magical beings of some sort, like the Lady of the Lake or Morgan Le Fay, for instance, were actually surviving refugees from Atlantis. The Atlanteans in Lawhead's lore are kind of like the Numenorians in Tolkien. They're like uniformly beautiful. They live for centuries. They age really slowly, and they are masters of craft, masters of mysticism and magical power and that sort of stuff. So all of that was really cool, right? And like I said, I only read the books once. They went out of print a while ago. I suspect they're probably back in print now that this is happening. And I only read them once, like I said, but they stuck with me. I never stopped thinking about them. I loved these books. In my opinion, they are the best modern retelling of the Arthur cycle. Though, to be fair, I have not read Bernard Cornwell's books. I hear they're very good, but that's for another day. When Game of Thrones happened and every streaming service and cable network in the world seemed to be gobbling up the adaptation rights for every fantasy book series they could get their hands on, the Pendragon Cycle is the one in my mind, along with a couple of others. I have a list in my head that I thought would make a great candidate for a streaming series. But I looked it up, and at the time I was thinking that the books were out of print and there wasn't much pop culture chatter about them. So I had no idea that anyone was interested in adapting them, let alone the folks over at the Daily Wire. Now, this is a conundrum for me. I am sorely vexed by this situation because on the one hand, I ought to be excited. I've seen some of the behind the scenes stuff that they've done for this, and if it were any other production company, I think I would be excited. But on the other hand, it's the Daily Wire, and it's not just the Daily Wire, it's the particular person from the Daily Wire who is spearheading the project. And now that the Daily Wire seems to be falling apart, maybe we will never see this show. Maybe it will be moved to some other platform. Who knows? But we're going to work through my feelings on this in real time. I will edit this video, but the sequence of events, or the events will still be sequential. So the first thing we're going to do is look at a short clip here about what the creator and showrunner of the Pendragon Cycle thinks the story is about.
What's the Pendragon Cycle generally about? I have never heard of this series, but I'm excited to watch. It is about Arthur Pendragon, ultimately, although we don't meet Arthur in the 7 episodes that we've currently shot. It's about sub-Roman Britain, which is the time sort of between the fall of Rome in Britain and the Saxon conquest of Britain. And so it's a period that we don't know an awful lot about, and it's the period from which Arthurian lore stems. One thing I love about the series is that it isn't a chivalric, it isn't a French influenced Arthurian tale. It doesn't take place in the high Middle Ages like some of the later Arthurian stories do. It places Arthur more in his historic context. If there was an Arthur, this is when he would have been, and when all the earliest Arthurian legend takes place. And it's about a lot of things that I think are really relevant to us. It's about what is it to be a man. It's about what is it to have a mission. What is it to believe in God and to believe in Christ in a time and in a world that isn't receptive to that. Those are challenging questions, and I think sometimes our politics and our faith, like everyone, we're products of our environment. We like to think that we're not. We like to think that our ideas are like the true.
Okay, we'll stop there. So, for context, the person you just watched, in case you don't know, is named Jeremy Boring. He is, along with Ben Shapiro, the co-founder of the Daily Wire, and until recently was the co-CEO of the Daily Wire. There's a story going around that he stepped down from that position in order to spearhead the filming of the Pendragon Cycle episodes. There's another story floating around that he's been fired from the company entirely. Who knows? At the time of this recording, that hasn't quite been worked out in public yet. So I want to offer a couple of caveats before I dive in here. Those of you who are familiar with my channel know my political proclivities. I am not a conservative. I'm not a right-winger by any stretch of the imagination. So I want to offer a caveat here before I dive into why I think this is the biggest red flag that the show could be a disaster. In principle, there is no reason that an evangelical Christian, as Jeremy Boring is, or a political conservative, as Jeremy Boring is, there's no reason such a person cannot produce good art and good cinema. It's been done many times before. There have always been conservatives and even evangelical Christians working in mainstream entertainment and making good stuff, and even making good stuff independently. The best example I can think of, and this is a little bit of a segue, but it's a good modern example that's still going on, is the TV show The Chosen, which, if you don't know, is a prestige TV historical drama about Jesus and the people who knew him, or Jesus as seen through the lives of the people he knew, right? So it's a little bit, I think of it as like ancient Southwest Asia walk and talk West Wing drama, right? It is focused, the main character is not Jesus. Jesus is the most consequential character in the show, but he's not the main character. The main characters are the apostles and the other people who join the Jesus movement when it is going on. It's a little akin to, I think, like the West Wing, how President Bartlett is the most consequential character on that show because his existence defines and disrupts the lives of all the other characters, but he's not the main character of that show. The Chosen works that way. And The Chosen is really, really good, in my opinion. It's one of my favorite TV shows right now. Now, the creator and showrunner of The Chosen, Dallas Jenkins, is a professed evangelical Christian and a professed political conservative. That has not prevented him from making a great show. And the reason it hasn't prevented him from making a great show is that The Chosen is not being made as a tool in the culture war. Whatever Dallas Jenkins' opinions are about woke Hollywood or anything like that, he has stated multiple times that he's not making this show to do anything other than tell a great story about Jesus Christ. And if you know he's an evangelical Christian and you know he's a political conservative and a theological conservative and other things like that, you see that reflected in the work. But it doesn't detract from the work because it is not the point of the work. And that brings us to Jeremy Boring here. Jeremy Boring and Ben Shapiro have both said on multiple occasions, I have now learned, that the goal of the DailyWire's entertainment output is to offer a counter narrative to woke Hollywood. So that means that the Pendragon Cycle here is being produced to, attack woke Hollywood or something, to offer an alternative to woke Hollywood. And that's a problem, because if that is the point of the project, it is necessarily going to lead you to creative decisions that are probably not best for the story you're trying to adapt. And the reason they're doing this, the big picture reason they're doing this is Jeremy Boring and Ben Shapiro and the rest of the people in that sphere of content creation incorrectly believe that Hollywood is run by a bunch of leftists and a bunch of cultural Marxists who have some kind of secret moral degenerate agenda that they're trying to socially engineer. So they're forcing diversity into media, and they're trying to trans the kids and all this other stuff by putting out woke content. That's, in other words, they think that Hollywood is producing entertainment for the purposes of advancing an ideological agenda. And they are 100% wrong about that, unless you consider capitalist accumulation of profit to be an ideological motive, which I do, but not everyone does. Because that's the only real motive behind Hollywood. They want money. And they are advancing their entertainment in the service of making money. And the reason that we're seeing so much diversity, both on screen and behind the camera, in Hollywood is because the demographics of the United States and of the world in general are changing. By the year, I believe 2045 or 2050, a majority of Americans will no longer be white people. White people will be the largest single group, but all of the other groups combined will outnumber us. And that means a couple of things. That means the customer base of the next 25 years and the employment pool of the next 25 years is going to be increasingly full of non-white people. It's going to have more women in it because women, for a lot of various reasons, are graduating college at rates higher than men are, and a whole bunch of other stuff like that. So Hollywood is responding to the free market. The free market, or natural selection, or whatever you want to call it, is forcing diversity on Hollywood, not the other way around. Now, that's a bit of a tangent, but I think it helps illustrate the conundrum for the Daily Wire here, because, as I said before, they think that Hollywood is forcing diversity out of some ideological agenda, when the truth is that diversity is being forced on Hollywood from below. But because the Daily Wire and Jeremy Boring here believe that this is how social change works, they think if they produce TV shows with their own ideological agenda to push their own ideological agenda, then they can affect change. They think that the reason we're seeing more diversity and more open acceptance, say, of trans people or of queer people, is because Hollywood brainwashed generations of Americans through their woke entertainment. That's not how it happened. But they think that is how it happened. So they think they can do the reverse. And so they've been putting out anti-woke content, I guess, anti-woke movies and TV shows on their platform that they're hoping are going to have crossover appeal and thus reverse social engineer wokeness, right? They want to reverse what they see as the social engineering and create a more conservative society, because they incorrectly think that politics is downstream from culture. They think that policies like gay marriage or trans rights happen because they happen in politics, because they became popular in entertainment first. And again, that is a backwards formulation. So they think they can make conservative content, presumably of high quality and high entertainment value, that will reverse that trend and create generations of more conservative Americans. Given all of that, even if all of that were true, even if we grant them the assumption that politics is downstream from culture, we're still left with the fact that this guy, Jeremy Boring, the showrunner of the Pendragon Cycle, the creator of the show, the co-director of every episode, as far as I can tell, and probably the lead writer of the show, is the guy who made Lady Ballers. He was the director and the co-writer of Lady Ballers. Now, whatever you may think of Lady Ballers' political message, it's a terrible film. It's objectively a bad film. I hate to say that because I don't believe in objective criticism, but it's almost a universally panned movie, even among conservative viewers. It is not good. And Lady Ballers is really the only thing that Jeremy Boring has been in charge of as, a creative executive. So it does not inspire confidence that he got the TV rights to this book and decided to make a prestige TV series out of it. Now, that being said, I have looked at some of the BTS, and that's where my confusion comes in. But a lot of what I'm seeing in their production journal, Daily Wire posted a production journal for the filming of the first season of this show. You can watch it on their YouTube channel, although I don't think you should give them the views. And you can see the videos elsewhere as well. And what I'm seeing vexes me, because if this were any other production company, I would probably be excited about it. But it's not any other production company. It is the Daily Wire, and I remind you, the guy who made Lady Ballers. So let's take a look at some clips from their behind-the-scenes material.
This is incredibly surreal because we've been planning and dreaming about this day for months.
This is from their very first video in their playlist, and it looks, you're going to see as I go through some other clips here, that it looks like they threw a lot of money at this, like a lot of money. And I suspect that may be what is sinking the company. But we'll talk more about that later. But as we go through this, I want you to notice, or I want you to, pay attention to like the attention to detail they've made. The fact that they're doing international location shooting, they've built really elaborate sets. They have invented a language to be spoken, an Atlantean language to be spoken by some of the characters here. This costs a lot of money. And as you watch through this footage, I want you to see if you can understand why I am having the reaction that if this was any other production company, I would be excited about this. See, that's cool, right? So I've done a little bit of fight choreography, and I've got the pictures to prove it. Maybe I'll post one up here. That looked legit. That was like legit sword play for, stage combat. Not really a big deal, but it's something I really pay attention to in productions like this. So whoever's training the actors knows what they're doing, and that's good.
Look at this intricate hair.
See what I mean?
You want to get how long that's
Oh my gosh.
every day it takes.
Right. So like the hairstyles, the clothing, the sets that are being built, all of them are pretty darn good, right? Somebody knew what they were doing here, and yet it's the guy who made Lady Ballers. I cannot get past that. I just can't. I'm sorry.
Don't move, okay? Because it's going to be very sticky and it'll stick to itself.
Right. So the costume design and the makeup it's giving Vikings, it's giving Game of Thrones, it's giving The Last Kingdom, right? Those are all shows I love. This is my jam. I love fantasy, and I love the Viking era. I love all that stuff, right? So, gosh, I cannot see past. There's so much potential here. And I cannot see past the fact that this is the guy who made Lady Ballers and is making this TV show specifically to be part of a culture war. I'm sure he has said he loves the story anyway. And I guess he could make it for its own sake, but he's not. And that's the problem.
Shooting in our bespoke Cymru village, and it's an important scene. Which
that guy,
Myrddin remembers.
Hold on, let's back up.
Scene which
Let's back up.
bespoke Cymru village, and
Okay, yeah. That guy, the Roman guy, that guy was in Lady Ballers, right? So this is another red flag for the this show right here. They're bringing in mostly new faces, people we've never heard of before, at least unless you're like a super duper deep cut film geek. I've never heard of most of these actors before, and that doesn't mean they're going to be bad. There's a lot of great actors out there who are looking for their shot, but the pool of talent they're seeming to draw from seems to be limited. Like this dude right here was in Lady Ballers, and he played the actual trans woman in the movie. Like he's the character whose character arc is realizing that he is a woman, or she, is a woman. And Jeremy Boring's character kicks her in the balls and, puts her back in her place and snaps her out of it, right? So the fact that this guy was involved in Lady Ballers, does that mean he was just a hungry, thirsty actor looking for a shot? Or is he on board with the Culture War project? I'm not sure how good of an actor he is. He wasn't that great in Lady Ballers, but nobody was great in Lady Ballers. So maybe that's not his fault. Again, and so like the costume design looks great, in my opinion. The pool of talent, I'm not excited about. Brett Cooper is in this show, y'all. Brett Cooper. Lady Ben Shapiro herself. I don't know what to make of that.
This time we're going to meet Morgan. We just shot the scene where she's sort of like peering through and looking at Karis and Daphne. This is her the first time the audience sees Morgan.
Right. So like I was saying before, this part interests me, right? So look at the lighting here, look at the set design, the costuming, the hair. It's all on point, in my opinion. And these two characters, Myrddin and Karis, Morgan on the right side of the screen and Karis on the left, are two Atlanteans who are pretty important to the story. Spoilers ahead. Karis ends on the left here, ends up being the mother of Myrddin, and she's the Lady of the Lake. And Morgan, obviously, is Morgan Le Fay. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think this is the video where they reveal that they have an Atlantean language that they invented for the show, which is not in the books. In the books, if I recall correctly, the dialogue is all written in English. I don't remember a time when anyone who was Atlantean spoke the Atlantean language. I will say, though, the casting for these characters here is on point. Like, these are the descriptions of the characters. I noticed as I was going through this that everybody's white. That would not stand out to me if this wasn't a Daily Wire production, right? Because like if you watch Vikings, everybody's white. If you watch Last Kingdom, everybody's white. It makes sense. It's a historical adaptation, right? And those two shows in particular are not really fantasy, but I would not notice that all of the characters on this show are white if it wasn't a Daily Wire production being made for the purpose of advancing a culture war agenda. This is their anti-diversity statement, right? Tall, beautiful, blonde women. I don't know if these women are tall in real life, but you get the point, right? This is the Aryan ideal we're looking at right here. It's also a book-accurate casting, I should say, but it's also the Aryan ideal.
I used to think that J.R.R. Tolkien was a total weirdo for having created Elvish. Like, who would go that far to build out a whole language for his universe? And the minute I started doing this, I instantly understood. It just is so engrossing and such a beautiful way to build a world, to imagine.
Right? So like I said, they made up their own language for the show. And I don't know how good it is. I'm not a linguist. I don't know what this guy's reputation is. He has the same last name as one of the hosts on the Daily Wire. Maybe they're related. I don't know. But this is not like doing things on the cheap. They put real money into this. And it's little things like this, as I was going through the BTS videos, that got me in the mindset of like, oh my God, if this was not the Daily Wire, if this was not the guy who made Lady Ballers running the show, I could find myself being excited about it. It's maddening. Madness, I tell you.
Otherworldly, mystical. If it feels mass-produced at all, which is what the casting effect makes you feel like, then it doesn't feel like this is the one.
Yeah, so Jeremy Boring I'm sure he doesn't know anything about swords. But, I mean, did you see the costuming there for the Atlantean soldiers? And how distinct that looks from the British characters? And the Romans all looked different as well. Like, each culture has its own distinct look. And that's really cool. That's a very great, compelling visual image. And again, look at all the money they threw into this. This, I think, is why the Daily Wire is collapsing right now. If it is collapsing, that remains to be confirmed at the time of this recording. But, I mean, this to me looks like a show where they don't have a large enough subscriber base to ultimately recoup the cost of making this show, and they are unlikely to attract enough new subscribers to recoup the cost of this show if they keep it on their own platform. Right? So maybe this will get offloaded to another place. I don't know.
Welcome back to production on the Pendragon Cycle. I think the moment before you take his hand,
I mean, at face value, that battle footage is as good as anything we saw in Vikings or The Last Kingdom or the Game of Thrones or Game of Thrones. It's so baffling. It's so baffling that this is real. Okay. That right there, that was the part that hooked me, right? This is what we're seeing right here is Atlantis. Watch this. Look at this. This is insane. That's nuts. Right. So what we're seeing here is Atlantis before the fall, right? This is like, I guess, probably it would have to be at the beginning of the series. Like the first book of the series, Taliesin, about half of it takes place in Atlantis before Atlantis falls, leading up to the fall of Atlantis. And like the main character is Caris, who becomes the Lady of the Lake and the mother of Myrddin. And it's based on ancient Minoan culture where the bull dance, the leaping over bulls as part of a religious ritual and it's part of like games in the arena was a real thing. And the author put that in the books, and these people, this production went and found people who could really do it and put it on screen. This is something we've never seen before, like a depiction of Minoan culture. I realize this, in universe it's Atlantis, but a lot of scholars think that myths of Atlantis were based partially on the Minoan culture. This is what hooked me, right? If this was any other production company, this bit right here is what would hook me. Because we're going to see the fall, we're going to see like Minoan Atlantis, and then we're going to see the fall of Atlantis. That's potentially awesome television, y'all. I don't know what to say. So where does that leave us, right? One thing I want to mention that I didn't mention at the beginning when I was watching Jeremy Boring's What is the Pendragon Cycle, is he mentioned that to him the story is about basically about masculinity and about Christianity. And I'm not going to say that those are not themes in the books. They certainly are. But I don't think I'm out of pocket to say that those are not the dominant themes that most readers take away from the story. You cannot tell the story of King Arthur without talking about Christianity or the rise of Christianity. It's integral to the story, right? And Stephen R. Lawhead, the author of the books, puts that in there. But when I hear Jeremy Boring talking about how this is a story about being a Christian in a world that isn't friendly to Christianity, I don't quite understand what he's talking about, because we don't live in that world, at least in the West. And it's another expression of something I've talked about before, how white American evangelicals behave and think as if they are the gold standard of Christianity, like they are the default Christian, and they get to decide what's heresy and et cetera, despite the fact that a huge amount of their belief system is entirely modern and almost, and in some cases, exclusively American. And a lot of the what they experience as persecution is actually them being on the receiving end of the principle that when you have privilege, equality feels like oppression. And one thing evangelical Christians have done in the United States is appropriate a lot of stories and a lot of media properties that they feel like they own, like Lord of the Rings or the Chronicles of Narnia, for instance. They look at those works and they see that, well, these authors were Christians of a sort, so therefore they must agree with us and we own this now. Like I now realize in retrospect, growing up as a kid in the 1980s, I lived through what was essentially the colonization of Lord of the Rings fandom and Chronicles of Narnia fandom by white American evangelicals. And there's now like a couple generations of people who've grown up in that community feeling like those stories belong to them. And therefore any adaptation of those stories that doesn't flatter their particular interpretation is seen as like woke garbage or moral degeneracy or whatever. And I hear a lot of that in what Jeremy Boring is talking about. To me, and I think to most of the readers of these books, the real central theme of the story was what does a kingdom based on justice actually look like, right? But but that's a minor thing. It's certainly a valid read of the story to say that it's primarily about Christianity or masculinity or whatever. But it's, again, this is the guy who made Lady Ballers. Again, this is a TV show being made by a media company that is explicitly engaged in culture war nonsense. And I can't help but feel that they settled on those themes for purposes of expressing their ideology, and not because they thought settling on those themes would open up new insights into the story they were adapting. And the politicalization of this, the fact that they're doing this primarily, maybe not primarily, but significantly out of ideological motives, leads to little things that are red flags indicating that this show could be a disaster, despite the cool visuals I've been seeing in the behind the scenes material. Let's start with the title of the show. The Pendragon Cycle is a terrible name for a TV show. There's a reason Game of Thrones is called Game of Thrones and not A Song of Ice and Fire. There's a reason The Rings of Power is called The Rings of Power and not just The Lord of the Rings. The title of a show has to evoke what the show is about. Game of Thrones is called Game of Thrones because the TV show leans very heavily into the political aspects of the story. In the books, there is politics. It is what the story is about, but there's a lot more magic and a lot more fantasy elements in it than there is in the TV show. And centering the show on a political struggle, a game around or of political power for the throne of Westeros, tells you what the show is about. Game of Thrones. That was the title of the first book in the series, but it became the title of the entire show. And the Pendragon Cycle doesn't really evoke to me what the show is about. If you don't know the significance of the name Pendragon, you're kind of lost. What is cycle telling us about the show, right? So the fact that they are keeping the Pendragon Cycle as the title of the show tells me that they viewed the acquisition of this property as being kind of soulless, right? They acquired the rights to the property and then they just kept the name because they didn't have the creativity to come up with something more evocative. Pendragon by itself would have been fine. I don't think that would have been perfect, but it would be better than the Pendragon Cycle. So I don't know what to make of this. I'm sorely vexed by what I'm seeing here. On the one hand, as a fan of the books, which I am now going to reread, that's one silver lining here. At least this project reminded me that these books are out there and that I really should reread them because I enjoyed them a lot at the time. So on the one hand, I should be excited because some of the behind the scenes stuff that we saw would have me interested if this was any other production company. On the other hand, it's the guy who made Lady Ballers. So I'm going to be following this story and keep covering it on my channel because I'm really interested to see how this turns out. This could blow up in their faces and be like the most catastrophic, embarrassing thing that DailyWire has ever done, or it could turn out to be a great show in spite of itself, right? It's possible they produced a good show here in spite of their ideological motives, and it could be something on the level of The Chosen, where it's a good show produced by political and religious conservatives that's good in spite of those things or alongside those things and not because of those things, where those things aren't the point of the project. But it's the guy who made Lady Ballers. I'm not going to let that go. And that does not inspire confidence in me. So I'll wrap it up here. Let me know what you think down below. You know the drill. Make offerings to the great God algorithm. And until next time, remember that what's best in life is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and engage in discourse with the women. Thanks for watching.